Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here. Time for the Hurricane Outlook and discussion. It is Monday, October 24th, 2022. We have several areas to watch, two of which are on the National Hurricane Center graphic. The third area, I added that because I do think that in the coming days, beyond that 5-day time frame, but only by a little bit, there's an area that we do have to watch, potentially in the Southeast Caribbean. It's just outside of the 5-day time frame that the Hurricane Center sees as more reliable when they're looking at all this stuff. But we do have a couple of areas to watch. It's also a very infamous time of year. We've had Wilma way back in 2005, and it does seem like a long time ago now, doesn't it? I guess it's your perspective. For me, it still feels like yesterday. I was there for it. So we'll look at Wilma at the end of today's update. And then Hurricane Sandy, we're coming up on 10 years, a decade since Sandy. We'll also look at that and some of the way that was progressing 10 years ago today. All right, good to have you along with me. Let's get started and see what's out there. Here's our first area near Bermuda. Actually, it's Invest Area 94L, a very small system, very concentrated. I'll show you that closer in just a moment. And then this is another area that could go on to develop further in the coming days, as a low pressure area is expected to develop from some energy over the western parts of the subtropical Atlantic, meaning that it's outside of the deep tropics here, right around this area. It's north of the tropics. This is your subtropical region. And neither of these systems very impactful, but as we can see here on satellite, the one near Bermuda, 94L right there, yes, that could bring, it's already bringing some shower activity, a little bit of an increase in wind. Not a major impact system, but it's there, even as small as it is. Satellite animations these days and just the overall products are very good, so it's easier to pick these systems out than it was, say, 50 plus years ago, even 30 years ago, right? Our technology has just gotten better and better. And then there's just this overall large area of low pressure in the mid to upper levels, and then some energy over here. Some of that could migrate up towards the area between Bermuda, Puerto Rico, and the southeast U.S. Hey, that's like the Bermuda Triangle, right? And try to get going somewhere in this region. Again, none of these systems posing a major threat of impacts, but there are impacts nevertheless. And maybe some good tank rain, as I mentioned in my What's Up segment this morning, I do believe. I think I mentioned it. They have tanks there. That's how they get their fresh water, these cisterns. And you got to get the fresh water from the rainfall to really help resupply those tanks. So maybe this will do just that. Then we have to watch this area down here as it migrates off to the west with time. In fact, it's mentioned here by TAF-B, the Tropical Analysis and Forecast Branch. And this is interesting. It is a late season, legit tropical wave. So there is that energy there. It represents heat and vorticity and energy, moisture. Late season tropical wave approaching the Lesser Antilles. It'll bring fresh winds. That's a maritime term for the way the winds increase over a period of time, and rough seas to the waters near the Lesser Antilles by Tuesday afternoon. And then marine interest, especially lesser vessels, need to be cautious. So you see, yes, these systems do have impacts to more than just land areas. They are certainly prone to causing problems for maritime interests, and that's why we like to talk about them and show them. But so there's the tropical wave. There's what it looks like again on satellite here going back. That's that energy right there. There's the wave right there. And this is going to end up in the vicinity of the Southeast Caribbean. It's fairly slow moving, and it could combine with some vorticity coming off of South America. And that whole area could wrap up in a few days, maybe between days 5 and 6 in the Eastern Caribbean. We'll look at that on the GFS here as we go forward. Real quick, close-up of 94L. There is Bermuda. And there's our tiny little system there. Some deeper thunderstorm activity, especially earlier. It's trying to fire convection. Look, the key is persistence. You have to have those thunderstorms be persistent, not just transitory where they blow up, they get a lot of people talking about it, but then they collapse again. You have to have consistency and persistency. Is that a word? They have to hang around for more than just a few hours, and we'll see if this can generate enough thunderstorm activity for the next maybe 6 to 12 hours or so, preferably between 12 and 24, so that it is persistent. It's not just, like I said, transitory. And if it does that and stays persistent, then this could become a depression briefly before it moves off towards this area to the north of Bermuda where the water temperatures are certainly cooler, and it wouldn't support that deeper thunderstorm activity, as limited as it may be. Hey, it shows up pretty well on vorticity, the overall energy that's sitting out there. That's 94L itself right there. And then we're just starting to see the beginnings of some energy trying to come together, again, well to the north and north-northwest of Puerto Rico. Nothing there quite yet, but this will become more prevalent. And then we have to watch this area right here. I think this is going to end up over in the Eastern Caribbean, and it could try to come together. And I'll show you that, of course, as I kept teasing it here on the GFS in just a little bit. So, I like to look at the analysis. What are we looking at? What's the background state doing? Well, we still have our La Nina firmly in place. Boy, the Atlantic overall, everything warmer than average, especially in the far northern Atlantic, well above the long-term average. I mean, that is pretty remarkable as we get into the latter part of the hurricane season here. The closing weeks, the Atlantic basin still very much warmer than it should be with that La Nina. So yes, that can tend to favor development over here into October, late October. We're there almost to the last week, and even into November. I mean, look at what we had in 2020. Yes, that was a different season entirely, but not too different from the overall setup of what we've got going on. So you never know. We could get some activity even into November. But first, well, heck, this one system down here that might form, that could last into early November. I'll show you that as I tease it once again on the GFS coming up here in a few minutes. A close-up shot, though, kind of highlighting this more. Very warm relative to average overall. The Gulf at least has cooled down a little bit. Overall, the background state of anomalous warmth has come down just a little bit, which is great news, considering what happened, of course, with Ian. But everything else generally much warmer than average. And then look at these here, these purples. That's over here on the left side of the scale. 4, almost 5 Celsius below the long-term average. And then a lot of that cold anomaly extends westward across the equatorial Pacific. Yeah, what will happen with the La Nina and the overall ENSO state, as we call it, El Nino Southern Oscillation, ENSO, we'll have to wait and see. We start talking about that in December. We're not quite there yet, but just a little hint. It looks like the La Nina will start to back off, and we'll head more towards neutral as we get into early 2023. And beyond that, it's just a wait-and-see situation. You know how that goes. I did want to show you this, the actual sea surface temperatures over the Atlantic basin here. The other chart was anomalies, or your departures from average. So here are your isotherms, lines of equal temperature. And in this case, we're looking for 26 Celsius because that's typically what we can see to support hurricane activity. And generally speaking, everything south of that line is still warm enough. And as such, our systems that are out here that we will be watching, including 94L, generally in an area where water temperatures are just warm enough, and they are certainly warm enough down here in the Caribbean, 28 to 29 Celsius, very warm if something were to try to get started. Off the coast of the mid-Atlantic, yes, the gradient is starting to develop here, the difference in temperature over distance, because the shelf is colder, the shelf waters, colder, shallower, easier to cool off. The Gulf Stream runs through here as well. That's a deeper moving warm water current. And then you just have your general area of warmth sitting out here in the subtropical Atlantic. So yes, you can still get some development, and that's where Bermuda is located. And yeah, we got to watch that. Again, nothing too substantial, but water temperatures could allow for some additional development. The Gulf, well, the good news here, and very, very good news, where is that 26 Celsius line? Well, right about here. So it has pulled away from, I almost drew off of it, sorry. Kindergarten, Mark, you learned it in kindergarten. Follow the lines. There it is, right there. So that's the 26 Celsius line. Now look, this can be a little bit deceiving. I'm drawing this to show you that most of the shelf water area from Texas over to Florida has cooled off enough, naturally, as the seasons have progressed, so that you don't have to worry as much about a significant hurricane coming in at peak intensity. But, there's always a but. You can get something that's fast-moving, still bringing some big impacts, depending on where it makes landfall. So, it's not over yet. Don't look at that, and don't hear people say, if there happens to be development later on, maybe in the Gulf. I'm just saying water temperatures alone do not dictate impacts. They are part of the equation, and you can still get a fast-moving hurricane moving into one of these areas, bringing heavy rain, high wind, knocking trees down, misery, the whole power outage thing, and very importantly, because we're talking about the Gulf, storm surge. Storm surge has nothing to do with water temperatures directly. So just kind of keep that in mind. I'm trying to, again, balance the good news here. The yes, water temperatures are cooling off in the 26 line, 26 Celsius. By the way, that's about 79 and some change degrees Fahrenheit. We just round it up and call it 80. That is pulling away from the Gulf Coast, but it doesn't mean that the all clear signal has been given, because we know nature can do some rather unusual things if allowed, so to speak, right? So will it do that? Well, let's take a look here. This is the GFS from the 12Z run today, and this is the 850 millibar part of the atmosphere. Remember, the atmosphere's layered, and this is the analysis. There's our little tiny piece of energy near Bermuda. Doesn't look like much, and then there's really nothing out here just yet, but it will develop. And then there's a little bit of energy over in the western parts of the tropical Atlantic that we will have to watch. So let's do that. Let's move this out. We're going to go out to a week just to kind of point out a couple of things here. Let's look at the first 5 days first, and we'll go in 24-hour increments. So 24 hours out, not much out there overall. The system near Bermuda kind of goes on by. Again, maybe some nice rain and some gusty winds from time to time, but that's about it. Then we start watching this area trying to develop over the next few days. And then there is our tropical wave in the southwest portions of the tropical Atlantic, headed towards the Windward Islands, the southern Lesser Antilles. Another 24 hours out, we're out to 48 hours. No, not much out there overall, so let's go to 72. Now we start to see some of that energy here streaming up out of the Caribbean, and it tries to concentrate, again, between Bermuda and the Bahamas or wherever. Just pick your geographic location, and it's trying to get there. Over those warmer waters, it's doing it. And then finally, by 96 hours, it's coming together a little bit more. Some of that energy is starting to work its way into the southeastern Caribbean. Some of that vorticity comes off of South America, wrapping up into it. Finally, by day 5, things start to get a lot more interesting overall. There's our system, broad. That's why it would be more subtropical. It's spread out over a large area. And then we're starting to see now, right at day 5, a concentration of the vorticity down here. Satellite would look like, hey, something's trying to bubble up there. If we looked at a satellite presentation of it, it would show just that. In fact, I think the GFS does this. Let me try to remember where that is on, and I know you guys are screaming at me. It's on the whatever, satellite, simulated IR satellite. Very nice. You got to love what Dr. Cowan's done. So at 5 days, that's what the GFS depicts down here, and that's what it shows for the system there over the subtropical Atlantic. But this is definitely very interesting. That's some deep convection that the GFS has. Now the question is, at day 5 here, we're going to stop here for now, is the GFS just overdoing it? Well, we don't know, because it's 5 days out. We don't know the future for sure. But what we do know, there is a tropical wave, there is an energy source, the water temperatures are warm. Let's look at the upper level winds just real quick. Let's see, do the upper level winds support something? Absolutely. That is a very large puzzle piece. That anticyclone sitting down there, that's a huge piece of the atmosphere compared to the little small feature that the GFS is showing. So the pattern is there. Will something develop in that pattern? We'll have to wait and see about that. It certainly looks favorable overall. And then here's our subtropical system kind of trapped in here within this trough feature. And again, that's part of why it's not purely tropical. So let's go back to the vorticity chart here. Get rid of me. Back to the lower dynamics. And let's go out to day 6. All right, so here's day 6, 144 hours out. There's our system, again, between Florida and Bermuda. Not a big problem. Could generate some waves if it sits out there long enough, so you might see some swells eventually make their way to the coastlines. But this starts to really come together by day 6, and then by day 7, it's, apparently off to the races. Now, that's a week out. That's 1 week out. Let's look at it back on the 200 millibar level. It's got an anticyclone sitting right over the top of it, really well-established outflow. So it's believable, I guess, from the overall pattern. So we'll just have to see if the GFS is just kind of anchoring on something and running off with it, so to speak, kind of convective feedback. I've seen a few people talking about it, and it's starting to kind of get a little bit more interest out there on social media as more than just a phantom event in the GFS. But we need to give it a day or two more, see if there's other model support, how the ensembles look. You guys know the drill. And so we'll watch and wait and see what happens as this evolves over time. Maybe it disappears, maybe it becomes more prevalent and the Hurricane Center outlooks it, and we'll have to really start watching it closer. All right, so let's move back in time, way back to 2005, Hurricane Wilma. Just a reminder of what late season hurricanes can do. Of course, this had its origins in the Western Caribbean, and it really menaced the northeast tip of the Yucatan. That's an understatement. It devastated that area, more or less. And then it took off towards southwest Florida, crossing in near just south of Marco Island, near Everglades City. So a bulk of the storm surge for Wilma was down here in mainland Monroe County. Luckily, it stayed away from Fort Myers, Naples, and that area, with the center moving right over Everglades City. We had a camera system. It was the first year that we ever began our live camera system project. That was all the way back in 2005. We actually had a cam in Everglades City. You can see the eye come over. There wasn't much to see with it. Very fast moving too. And then the storm, the hurricane, outran the surge. The surge came in after the eye passed. It was a very fast moving system. It dragged that surge with it. We picked up several feet there in Everglades City. And you can watch this. I'll put the link to it in the description of today's video, part of our Tracking the Hurricanes 2005 documentary that I made a long time ago now. I'll put a link to that if you want to watch the Wilma chapter. That is on YouTube, and you can see it for yourselves. Also, 10 years ago now, Sandy's evolution was just starting to really get cranking here after forming in the Central Caribbean to Southwest Caribbean. Moved across, of course, Jamaica, became a major hurricane prior to Cuba, and then the rest became absolutely incredible from what it did with the landfall as a post-tropical system, losing its tropical characteristics. That whole controversy, what we call it doesn't matter. It still had a major impact to areas up here in the Northeast, with lots of deaths, unfortunately, billions in damage, and it even devastated areas along the rest of the coastline here with high waves, damaging surf conditions, and of course the impacts to the Caribbean and even parts of the Bahamas. Sandy, 10 years ago, a very benchmark event, was just really starting to get started there. Yes, it did. And to all of this, Brian McNulty talking about Wilma as well. Nice little satellite or wind field recreation here as it came across Florida. Look at that area of calm. That's the blue. And then your hurricane force winds really shoving that surge into mainland Monroe County down here. The eye went right over parts of Everglades City, even clipping Marco Island, and then it moved over South Florida. And then they had some very strong winds over in Miami, and that created a lot of blown out windows and even some tossed vehicles. The very, very impactful Wilma. If you want to see this for yourselves, follow Mr. McNulty on Twitter. He's going to be on the National Tropical Weather Center live on Wednesday, talking about storm surge and sea level rise. This is the radar animation, something that Mr. McNulty does a lot. Those archives are absolutely incredible. And then, of course, here's Sandy. 10 years ago, Mr. McNulty on top of all of it. Brian, I'll call him. He's a friend of mine, so I can call him Brian. It's okay. But yes, 10 years, and then what, 17 years ago, if memory serves, since Wilma. And then, of course, here's his teaser where he's going to be on NTWC Live on Wednesday, so be sure to check that out. I was on last Wednesday from Secaucus, New Jersey, right before I went into New York City to meet with Fox Weather. So that's a pretty cool thing that grew out of the pandemic, this ongoing sort of discussion from various experts and various fields dealing with hurricanes. So Brian McNulty will be on there this coming Wednesday. I think I retweeted that tweet myself, anyway, for Mr. McNulty. All right, that is it from me for today. Let me get this online for you all. Lots to watch here as we start to close out the last week of October. and we'll see what happens with everything. And, I'll be on top of it. All right? All right. Have a good rest of your Monday. As always, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget, please do me a favor and subscribe, hit the notification button, and share with your friends, family, colleagues. Do what you can to help us grow what we're doing here on YouTube. I do appreciate it. Have a good rest of your afternoon. I'm Mark Sudduth. I'll talk to you again tomorrow.